Alrighty, okay, I am back. Camera is still not working. Come on, just stay on. Alright, I don't think it's gonna stay. I'll just keep it on this for now, for today. Or actually, I could just make it a black screen, right? I'll just do that. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, I'm just going through some stuff with TikTok. For some reason, it has to confirm my age now, so thank you for your patience on YouTube. Okay, I am live on YouTube. I am live on TikTok. Okay, so the plan for today is to cover the first half of chapter 9, and then I will also do the notes review for chapter 8. Okay. See, table of contents. Opportunity Knox was the previous chapter. Here we go. In this chapter, and I'm getting this from thebestnotes.com. If I ever forget, just please know I'm getting this from thebestnotes.com. Okay. Put on my teeth there. Okay. All right. Coming from thebestnotes.com, chapter 8, Opportunity Knocks. In this chapter, Homer and Candy confess their love for each other. But Candy also admits she also loves Wally. Candy cannot choose between them. Instead, she wants to wait and see. As shown in later chapters, Candy takes this stance often. She likes to shop around. It's one of the rules that she lives by. So this is starting to be discussed in the book. Irving highlighted this in chapter 8 too, that the different characters are living by different rules. Like Larch has his own set of rules. Homer Wells has his own set of rules. And yeah, Candy does too. Candy would rather let time take its course in the hopes that complex situations will work out rather than take action herself. This wait and see attitude does not sit well with Homer. His love for Candy, like Melanie's love for him, goes unreturned. So we can see like triangles, cycles perpetuating themselves, love missing. The difference between the two situations is that at least Homer knows that Candy does love him, and she does reciprocate, but it's kind of a weird love triangle because of Wally. Perhaps that is worse than Melanie not knowing where Homer is and knowing that he did not care for her enough to keep his promise. There is some history there too. Homer's first time was Melanie, and it did not go well. Perhaps they were just too young, or Homer just wasn't ready. And yeah, it I think it had a permanent effect on the relationship. Not only that, but the orphanage itself, right? St. Cloud's. All right, yeah, he didn't care enough for her to keep his promise. And that's my advice too. Is like if you're not sure, you're better off not making a promise. Don't make a promise that you can't keep, basically. That's the best way, in my opinion. Being in such close proximity to a person he loves and not being able to have her truly frustrates Homer. He feels persecuted, an orphan, and the sufferer of unrequited love. Unrequited love. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Is it unrequited? Yeah, I think it is. Unrequited love. Let me make sure. Unrequited?
Unrequited.
Yeah, unrequited. There we go. Unrequited love. And yes, I've been there before in my own personal life multiple times. I chase girls, they don't chase me back. That's just how it goes over and over again for me. Um, and it's good in a way because you it dispels your illusions, right? You face reality instead of living in your fantasy. Um, yeah. And in Homer's case, I would say it's not all bad, right? Because again, Candy is waiting and seeing. She didn't just straight up say no. She didn't just straight up say I don't like you. She said I love you too, so it's not exactly unrequited in this case, even though it may feel that way to Homer because of Wally. I often do sometimes wonder about the nature of monogamous relationships too. If you trace our roots back through the history of humanity, humans in olden times were polygamous. Men were hunters, women were caretakers, but men would have multiple partners, especially the strongest men, the smartest men, fastest, whatever. Um, and I feel like that's still the same way. I mean, look at like wildly popular entertainers; they're always bragging about how many women they've slept with and yada yada yada. Like it's like the Elvis effect. It's like if you're famous, if you could have whatever you want, it's like would you abstain? Most people probably would not. They would just live their wildest life, right? Why deny yourself if you can live it fully? Okay, so that was chapter 8. All right, chapter 9 is, let's see, Over Burma. So something else that John Irving is also exploring more as the book continues is World War II, Wally's adventures abroad, and I believe, if I remember right, at the end of chapter 8, Wally is shot down. So yeah, kind of like what I was predicting, he wasn't going to make it. I guess that's the nature of war, though. Not everyone gets out alive, but basically, no one does at the end, right? Everyone has their time, everyone has their day. Thankfully, we're all entitled at least to death and taxes, death being the better of the two, because it just means you're done with everything. You don't have to worry about anything ever again. So I'm still persevering. So don't you guys worry about me. I just need like to vent, I guess. Like you gotta like reduce the buildup. It's kind of like a garden hose. You just gotta release the buildup. like this app. Like, yeah, I get it. He had 1 million views, 1 million likes. Why not me? And it's dumb. But anyway, over Burma. And let me do some quick math. 386 for 48 is chapter 10. Borrow 2, that's 50. And then 12. 50 plus 12 is 62. Yeah, 62. Half of 62 is 31. So we will end today on page 14 from 31 is 17 or 17. Someone check my math in the comments if you're there. I guess I could use a calculator too, right? 387 plus, what did I say? 31? Yeah, I believe so. It should be 417 or 18. Let me, maybe because I did three. Oh, that's why, because I did 386. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the chapter begins at 386, not 387. So slightly confusing, but my arithmetic was correct. It would have been 417. 386 plus 31. Okay. So that's where I'm going to finish for today. I'm still doing half chapters because, simply put, these chapters are long, Sons of Guns. 62 pages is a long chapter. Hmm. Okay. Got my smoothie. I like making them. I've gotten actually pretty good at it too. Like my smoothies are really good. I guess we could talk about that a little bit before I dive in, because I haven't really had many just chatting sessions TikTok, and today strangely was the first time they verified my age. Maybe because they have a bunch of minors on here. I really don't know. I really don't know how many kids are using TikTok. I don't know. There's a bunch of content on here that's like not safe though for kids. I would say a lot of like adult stuff. Like today, it's talking a lot about how the One Direction guy died, and it's not necessarily bad, but it's kind of like the internet in general. Like it's not exactly censored, the stuff on here. It's content. And like if you're a parent, you might want to just keep track of what your kids are watching, I would say. I'm not a parent though, so I don't have to worry about that. I try to just lead my life the way I want the world to be. Like be the change you want to see in the world. That's kind of how I live my life. Like all the content I put out there is generally it's safe for a general audience, what we call GA. That's this book is not really GA material either. Like there is racism in the book. Um, there is um just general like derogatory remarks that are basically offensive. Um, yeah, some bad words in this book for sure. But what I was saying is my smoothies, I use banana, berries, um, fruit juice. The berries I have are frozen fruit, and I use yogurt. I've been doubling up on the yogurts because I'm trying to beat the expiration date at the end of the month. Ice, so good. I typically use apple juice in my smoothies, but this time I use cranberry grape. I recommend for you to try my recipe at home should you have a blender. It's pretty good. Okay. All right. Let's get back into the book. All right. Oops. Starting at the end. 386, right? Yeah, in this chapter, I would say be on the lookout for Homer and Candy. Homer and Candy's relationship, try to see how it develops and changes because of Wally either being KIA or eliminated. Him like potentially just going missing. Candy seeing that Wally isn't going to make it. So she might just defer to her option, the option she has, which is Wally. Sorry, not Wally, Homer. Yeah. She's going to go with Homer because Wally passes away. Here we go. Chapter 9 Over Burma. 2 weeks after Wally's plane was shot down, Captain Worthington and the crew of Opportunity Knox were still listed as missing. A plane making the same run had noted that approximately 1 square mile of the Burmese jungle, roughly halfway between India and China, had been consumed by fire, presumably caused by the exploding plane. Cargo was identified as jeep engines, spare parts, and gasoline. There was no evidence of the crew. The jungle was dense in that area and believed to be unpopulated. The spokesman for the U.S. Army Air Forces paid a personal visit to Olive and told her that there was no reason to be optimistic. Sorry, there was some reason to be optimistic. Maybe he survived the crash. The plane obviously had not exploded in the air meant that the crew might have had time to bail out. What would have happened afterward was anyone's guess. That would have been a better name for the plane, the Homer Wells, anyone's guess. Movie Homer. Movie. But Homer was supportive of Olive and Candy's view that Wally was not dead, that he was just missing. Privately, Homer and Ray Kendall agreed that there just wasn't much hope for Wally. That's the tricky thing about war, too. Some of those soldiers were never found. I mean, there's even a monument. I believe it's called Monument to the Unknown Soldier. Right, I have my computer here in front of me. Let me see if I can look it up. Is it called the Tribute or Monument? Can't type unknown. Yeah, Tribute to the Unknown Soldier because I mean there's so many people serving that it's like some of these people will just die and no one knows. No one knows what became of them. No one knows where they're at. That's why so many are like MIA, KIA, or just straight lost. It's in the Arlington National Cemetery, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I think I've actually seen it. Uh, yeah, just dedicated to all the people that have been missing, essentially, until the end of time. They go to war and they just don't come back. Just suppose he didn't go down the plane, Ray said to Homer when they were pulling lobster pots. So then he's in the middle of the jungle, and what does he do there? He can't let the Japs find him, and there's got to be Japs around. They shot down the plane, didn't they? There could be natives, said Homer Wells. Friendly Burmese villagers, he suggested. Or nobody at all, Ray Kendall said. Some tigers and lots of snakes, he added. Ah, shit. He should have been in a submarine. If your friend survived all the rest, wrote Wilbur Larch to Homer Wells, he's got all the diseases of Asia to worry about. Lots of diseases. It was horrible to imagine Wally suffering, and not even Homer's longing for Candy could allow him any comfort with the idea that Wally was already dead. In that case, Homer knew Candy would always imagine that she loved Wally best. Reality for orphans is so often outdistanced by their ideals. If Homer wanted Candy, he wanted her ideally. In order for Candy to choose Homer, Wally had to be alive. And because Homer loved Wally, he also wanted Wally's blessing. Wouldn't any other way be compromising to them all? I think Irving has it backwards here, too. I think Wally would have to be dead for Candy to choose Homer. Because otherwise, she would just choose Wally, right? If Wally was still alive, eventually he would be able to make his way back to Candy. Assuming that he didn't have some kind of like serious battle injury, like he like lost his sight or something like that. He became like permanently disabled. Presumably, he would be able to make his way back to Candy. Okay, I'm good. I just didn't want my smoothie to go to room temp. All right, let me see where it was. Wilbur Larch was flattered that Homer asked his advice. And on a matter of romantic love, of all things. How should I behave with Candy? Homer had asked. The old man was used to being such an authority that he found it natural to assume an authoritative voice, even regarding a subject he knows nothing about, Nurse Angela said indignantly. Larch was so proud of what he had written Homer that he showed his letter to his old nurses before sending it along. Have you forgotten what life is like at St. Cloud's? Dr. Larch asked Homer. You drifted so far away from us that you find a life of compromise to be unacceptable. And you, an orphan of all people, have you forgotten how to be of use? Don't think so badly of compromises. We don't always get to choose the ways we can be of use. You say you love her, then let her use you. It may not be the way you had in mind, but if you love her, you have to give her what she needs. And when she needs it, not necessarily when you think the time is right. What can she give you of herself? Only what she has left. If that's not everything you had in mind, whose fault is that? Are you not going to accept her because she hasn't got 100% of herself to give? Some of her is over Burma. Are you going to reject the rest? Are you going to hold out for all or nothing? And do you call that being of use? I think Homer's a little bit more flexible than that in terms of his relationships. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Melanie takes it, because Melanie herself does not yet know about Candy, right? It's not very romantic, Nurse Angela said to Nurse Edna. When was Wilbur ever romantic? Nurse Edna asked. Your advice is awfully utilitarian, Nurse Angela said to Dr. Larch. Well, I should hope so, Dr. Larch said, sealing the letter. As we might recall, Larch practices abstinence. He protects others from himself because he got VD from a hooker, basically, that his dad bought him when he graduated med school or something like that. When he went to med school, basically, he got like AIDS or something like that. And like because of that, he chose to stay single because he doesn't want to pass it around. He wants to be a good doctor. Okay, all right. I have to run to the bathroom. We'll be right back to pick up with page 388. So stay tuned. BRB. Okay, I'm back. Now Homer had a companion in sleeplessness. He and Candy preferred the night shift at Cape Kenneth Hospital. When there was a lull in their work, they were allowed to doze on the beds in the children's non-communicable ward, or found that the music of the restless children soothed him. Their troubles and pains familiar, their whimpers and outcries and night terrors transporting him beyond his own anxieties. Candy felt that the drawn black curtains in the nighttime hospital were suitable for mourning. The prevailing blackout conditions, which she and Homer had to observe in driving to and from the hospital, if it was dark, were also to Candy's liking. They used Wally's Cadillac for these occasions. They were permitted to travel with only parking lights on, and the Cadillac's parking lights were the brightest. Even so, the dark coastal roads seemed barely lit. They drove at funeral speed. If the station master at St. Cloud's, formerly the station master's assistant, had ever seen them passing, he would have thought again that they were driving a white hearse. Meanie Hyde, whose wife Florence was expecting, told Homer that he was sure his new baby would share something of Wally's soul, if Wally was truly dead. And if Wally was alive, Meanie said, the appearance of the new baby would signify Wally's escape from Burma. Everett Taft told Homer that his wife, Big Dot, had been plagued by dreams that could only mean that Wally was struggling to communicate with Ocean View. Even Ray Kendall, dividing his underwater attention between his lobsters and his torpedoes, said that he was reading his lobster pots, by which he meant that he found the content of the traps hauled from the deep to be worthy of interpretation. Untouched bait was a special sign. If the lobsters, which prefer food that's truly dead, wouldn't take the bait, it must mean the bait was manifesting a living spirit. You know I ain't religious, Ray said to Homer. Right, said Homer Wells. Because Homer Wells had spent many years wondering if his mother would ever return to claim him. If she even thought about him, if she was alive or dead, he was better at accepting Wally's undefined status than the rest of them were. Yeah, some dreams will never come true, Homer. Sorry to tell you, some dreams will never be realized. Your mom is probably never going to try to find you. I mean, if she really wanted to, she would go back to St. Cloud's, right, and ask about him at least. And then Wilbur Larch would be able to reach him through the letter, but yeah, there is going to be no happy reunion there. And yeah, the same could be said of Wally and Candy, right? They may never have a reunion either. That's just how it goes. An orphan understands what it means that someone important is just missing. And again, Irving and parallels. He likes to draw parallels between people, places, things. Olive and Candy mistaking Homer's composure for indifference, or occasionally short-tempered with him. Only doing what we all have to do, he said, reserving special emphasis for Candy. I'm just waiting and seeing. Why would they care all that much about Homer's input? I mean, what can Homer do, right? What can he do? There were fireworks that 4th of July, for one thing. It would have violated the blackout conditions. And for another, any simulation of bombs and gunfire would have been disrespectful to those among our boys who were facing the real music. In the nighttime hospital at Cape Kenneth, the nurses' aides conducted a quiet Independence Day celebration, which was interrupted by the hysterics of a woman who demanded an abortion from the young and imperious Dr. Harlow, who believed in obeying the law. But there's a war, the woman countered. Her husband was dead. He'd been killed in the Pacific. She had the wire from the War Department to prove it. She was 19 and not quite 3 months pregnant. I'd be glad to speak with her again when she's behaving reasonably, Dr. Harlow told Nurse Caroline. Why should she behave reasonably? Nurse Caroline asked him. Homer Wells had to trust his instincts regarding Nurse Caroline. Besides, she told him and Candy that she was just a socialist. And I'm not pretty, she added truthfully. Therefore, I'm not interested in marriage. In my case, I'd be expected to appear grateful, or at least to consider myself lucky. The hysterical woman would not be calmed, perhaps because Nurse Caroline's heart wasn't in it. I'm not asking for anything secret. I'm not asking for anything secret, the woman shouted. Why should I have to have this baby? Wells found a piece of paper with columns for laboratory analysis. He wrote the following across the columns. You go to St. Cloud's. You ask for the orphanage. He gave the piece of paper to Candy, who gave it to Nurse Caroline, who looked at it before she gave it to the woman, who instantly stopped protesting. When the woman had gone, Nurse Caroline made Homer and Candy accompany her to the dispensary. I'll tell you what I usually do, Nurse Caroline said, as if she were furious with them. I perform a perfectly safe dilatation with the curettage. I just dilate the cervix. I do this in my kitchen, and I'm very careful. They have to come to the hospital for a completion, of course. Someone might think they try to do it for themselves, but there's no infection and nothing's damaged. They've just miscarried. They've had the D without the C. All they need is a good scraping. And the bastards have to be accommodating. There's all the bleeding, and it's clear the woman already lost it. She paused and glared at Homer Wells. You're an expert about this too, aren't you? Right, Homer said. And you know a better way than my way, she asked. Not that much better, he said. It's a complete D&C, and the doctor is a gentleman. A gentleman, Nurse Carolyn said doubtfully. What's the gentleman cost? He's free, Homer said. I'm free too, Nurse Carolyn said. He asks you to make a donation to the orphanage if you can afford it, said Homer Wells. Why hasn't he been caught? Nurse Carolyn asked. I don't know, Homer said. Maybe people are grateful. Well, it's not exactly like Larch is a troublemaker, right? Like most people, he's trying to help. Like either help them get an abortion or help them um, giving a child to the orphanage. Um, yeah, he's not exactly a person that like revels in breaking rules. People are people, Nurse Carolyn said in her socialist voice. You took a stupid chance telling me, and a more stupid chance telling that woman. You don't even know her. Yes, Homer agreed. Your doctor isn't going to last if you keep that up, Nurse Carolyn said. Right, Homer said. Dr. Harlow found them all in the dispensary. Only Candy looked guilty, and therefore he stared at her. What are these two experts telling you? Dr. Harlow asked. He spent a lot of time looking at Candy when he thought no one saw him, but Homer Wells saw him, and Nurse Carolyn was very sensitive to the longings other women inspired. Candy was tongue-tied, which made her seem more guilty. Dr. Harlow turned to Nurse Carolyn. Got rid of the hysteric? He asked her. No problem, Nurse Carolyn said. I know that you disapprove, Dr. Harlow told her, but rules exist for reasons. Rules exist for reasons, said Homer Wells uncontrollably. It was such a stupid thing to say, he felt compelled to repeat it. Dr. Harlow stared at him. No doubt you're an abortion expert too, Wells, Dr. Harlow said. As we might recall, Homer's not exactly fond of abortions. Yeah, he believes in the right to life. Basically, it's Larch that was in favor of choice. And I don't think he's changed his position, but let's see. It's not very hard to be an abortion expert, Homer Wells said. It's a pretty easy thing to do. You think so? Dr. Harlow asked aggressively. Well, what do I know? Homer Wells said, shrugging. Yes, what do you know? Dr. Harlow said. Not much, Nurse Carolyn said gruffly. Even Dr. Harlow appreciated this. Even Candy smiled. Homer Wells smiled sheepishly too. You see, I'm getting smarter. That is what he smiled to Nurse Carolyn, who viewed him with an expression of condescension that was proper for nurses to exhibit only to nurses' aides. Dr. Harlow seemed to feel that the pecking order he revered was being treated with the reverence that was mandatory from them all. A kind of glaze appeared to coat his face, texture composed of righteousness and adrenaline. Homer Wells gave himself a brief sensation of pleasure by imagining something that could wake up Dr. Harlow and humble him. Mr. Rose's knife work might have that effect on Dr. Harlow. Homer imagined Mr. Rose undressing Dr. Harlow with his knife. Every article of clothing would be gathered around the doctor's ankles in strips and tatters. Yet on the doctor's naked body there wouldn't be a scratch. A month after Wally's plane was shot down, they heard from the crew of Opportunity Knox. We're halfway to China, the co-pilot wrote, when the Nips took some pot shots. Captain Worthington ordered the crew to bail out. The crew chief and the radioman jumped close together. The co-pilot jumped third. The roof of the jungle was so dense that when the first man crashed through it, he could not see the other parachutes. The jungle itself was so thick that the crew chief had to search for others. It took him 7 hours to find the radioman. The rain was so heavy it made such a dent against the broad palm leaves. None of the men heard the plane explode. The atmosphere was so rich with his own sense that the smell of the burning gasoline and the smoke from the fire never reached them. He wondered if the plane had not miraculously recovered itself and flown on. When they looked up, they could not see through the treetops, which everywhere glittered with bright green pigeons. In 7 hours, the crew chief contacted 13 leeches of various sizes. Which the radioman thoughtfully removed. The crew chief plucked 15 leeches off the radioman. He found the best way to remove the leeches was to touch the lighted end of a cigarette to their posterior ends. That way, they would release their contact with the flesh. If he just pulled them, they kept breaking. Their strong sucking mouths would remain attached. The radioman and the crew chief ate nothing for 5 days. When it rained, which it did most of the time, they drank the rainwater and gathered it in puddles and big palm leaves. They were afraid to drink the other water they encountered. Some of the water they thought they saw crocodiles. Because the radioman was afraid of snakes, the crew chief did not point out the snakes he saw. The crew chief was afraid of tigers, and he thought he saw one once, but the radioman maintained that they only heard a tiger, or several tigers, or the same tiger several times. The crew chief said that the same tiger followed them for 5 days. The leeches tired them out, they said. Although the roof of the jungle made the pelting rain louder, it did keep the rain from falling directly on the two men. Yet the jungle was so saturated that the rain almost constantly dripped on them. And when for brief intervals the rain stopped, the roof of the jungle allowed no sunlight to penetrate to the jungle floor, and the raucous birds, silent in the rain, were louder than the rain when they had their opportunities to protest the monsoon. The radioman and the crew chief had no idea where Wally and the co-pilot were. The 5th day they met up with the co-pilot, who had reached a native village only a day ahead of them. He was quite badly drained by the leeches. Since he'd been traveling alone, he had no one to burn off the leeches he couldn't reach. In the middle of his bag, there had been quite a gathering of them, which the natives were skillful at removing. They used a lighted stalk of bamboo like a cigar. The natives were Burmese and friendly. Although they spoke no English, they made it clear that they had no fondness for the Japanese invasion. Also, they knew the way to China. But where was Wally? The co-pilot had landed in a grove of ironwood. Canes of bamboo that he had to hack his way through were as stout as a man's thigh. The edge of his machete was as dull and round as the back of a blade. Burmese let them know they were not safe to stay and wait for Wally where they were. Some of the villagers would lead the co-pilot, the crew chief, and the radioman into China. For that trip, they darkened their skin with mashed peepal berries and tied orchids in their hair. They didn't want to look like white men. The trip took 20 days walking. They traveled 225 miles. They cooked no food. At the end of the journey, the rice was moldy. There was so much rain. Crew chief claimed he was terminally constipated. Co-pilot claimed he was dying of diarrhea. The radioman shat rabbit bullets and carried a low-grade fever for 15 of the 20 days. He grew a helmet of ringworm. Each man lost about 40 pounds. When they reached their base in China, they were hospitalized for a week. Then they were flown back to India, where the co-pilot was retained in the hospital for diagnosis, treatment of an amoeba. No one could say what amoeba it was. The crew chief had a colon problem. He was also retained. The radioman and his ringworm went back to work. They took all our gear when they put us in the hospital in China, he wrote to Olive. When they gave it back to us, it was all lumped together. There was 4 compasses. There was just 3 of us, but there was 4 compasses. One of us jumped out of the plane with Captain Worthington's compass. The radioman's opinion, it was better to have crashed with the plane than to have landed in that part of Burma without a compass. In August of 1940, Burma officially declared war against Great Britain and the United States. Candy told Homer that she needed a new place to sit, to be left alone. The dock made her want to jump off. She'd sat too many times on that dock with Wally. It didn't help that Homer would sit there with her now. I know a place, Homer told her. Maybe Olive was right, he thought. Maybe they hadn't cleaned the side of the house for nothing. When it rained, Candy sat inside and listened to the drops on the tin roof. She wondered if the jungle sounded as loud as that or louder, and if the sweet rot smell of the cider apples was anything like the stifling decay and progress smell of the jungle floor. When the weather was clear, Candy sat on the roof. Some nights she allowed Homer Wells to tell her stories there. Perhaps it was the absence of the Ferris wheel and of Mr. Rose's interpretations of the darkness that prompted Homer Wells to tell Candy everything. That summer, Wilbur Larch wrote to the Roosevelts again. He'd written to them both so many times under the constellations of either that he was unsure whether he had actually written to them or had only imagined doing it. He never wrote to one without writing to the other. He usually began, Dear Mr. President, Dear Mrs. Roosevelt, but occasionally he felt more informal and began, Dear Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Once he began even, Dear Eleanor. That summer he addressed the president quite plainly. Mr. Roosevelt, he wrote, dispensing with the endearment. I know that you must be terribly busy with the war, and I feel such confidence in your humanitarianism, and in your commitment to the poor, to the forgotten, and especially to the children. I mean, to be frank, To be honest, I mean, there's a lot of politicians today who could actually learn a lot from FDR. The way he governed, the way he led the country. He's a very socially conscious president, which is why he is to this day the only president who's served 4 terms. Biden, Harris, Trump, Nance, take note. That's how you lead. All right, anyway. To Mrs. Roosevelt, he wrote, I know your husband must be very busy, but perhaps you could point out to him a matter of the utmost urgency, or concerns the rights of women and the plight of the unwanted child. The confusing configurations of light that dazzled the dispensary ceiling contributed to the strident and incomprehensible manner of the letter. The same people who tell us we must defend the lives of the unborn, they are the same people who seem not so interested in defending anyone but themselves after the incident of birth is complete. The same people who profess their love of the unborn soul, they don't care to make much of a contribution to the poor. They don't care to offer much assistance to the unwanted or the oppressed. How do they justify such a concern for the fetus and such a lack of concern for unwanted and abused children? They condemn others for the accident of conception. They condemn the poor as if the poor can help being poor. One way the poor could help themselves would be to be in control of the size of their families. I thought that freedom of choice was obviously democratic. It was obviously American. It's an interesting topic, right? Nature, its influence on the choices we make, chemicals that are in our brains, trying to continue story, as it were, like pushing us to have kids and whatnot, like trying to have a family, trying to start a family, whatever you want to call it. You Roosevelts are national heroes. You are my heroes, anyway. How can you tolerate this country's anti-American, anti-democratic abortion laws? I still don't know about those. By now, Dr. Larch had stopped writing and was ranting in the dispensary. Nurse Edna went to the dispensary door and rattled the frosted glass panels. Is it a democratic society that condemns people to the accident of conception? Or Wilbur Larch? What are we, monkeys? If you expect people to be responsible for their children, you have to give them the right to choose whether or not to have children. What are you people thinking of? They're not only crazy, you're ogres. Wilbur Larch was yelling so loudly that Nurse Edna went into the dispensary and shook him. Wilbur, the children can hear you, she told him. And the mothers, everyone can hear you. No one hears me, said Dr. Larch. Nurse Edna recognized the involuntary twitching in Wilbur Larch's cheeks and the slackness in his lower lip. The doctor was just emerging from ether. The president doesn't answer my letters, Larch complained to Nurse Edna. He's very busy, Nurse Edna said. He may not even get to read your letters. I mean, even in those days. What about Eleanor? Wilbur Larch asked. What about Eleanor? Nurse Edna asked. Doesn't she get to read her letters? Wilbur Larch's tone of voice was whiny, like a child's, and Nurse Edna patted the back of his hand, which was spotted with brown freckles. Mrs. Roosevelt is very busy too, Nurse Edna said, but I'm sure she'll get around to answering you. It's been years, Dr. Larch said quietly, turning his face to the wall. Nurse Edna let him doze in that position for a while. She restrained herself from touching him. She was inclined to brush his hair back from his forehead, the manner that she often soothed any number of the little ones. Were they all becoming children again? And were they, as Nurse Angela claimed, all becoming the same, all resembling each other, even physically? Anyone visiting St. Cloud's for the first time might suspect that they were all members of the same family. Suddenly, Nurse Angela surprised her in the dispensary. Well, are we out of it? She asked Nurse Edna. What's the trouble? I was sure I ordered a whole case. Yeah, if you want to test this too, you can write your favorite politician, either whoever's in charge or your local governor or whatever. And yeah, you'll be lucky half the time to just hear back straight up. Because that's the dynamic of the one to many. Even with their staff, like it's hard. It's hard to be heard as one of the simple folk, one of the common folk. It's a lot easier to be heard if you're rich or famous. Case of what? Nurse Edna asked. Mertholiate red, Nurse Angela said crossly. I asked you to get me some red mertholiate. There's not a drop left in the delivery room. Oh, I forgot, said Nurse Edna, bursting into tears. Wilbur Larch woke up. "I know how busy you both are," he said to the Roosevelts, although he gradually recognized Nurse Edna and Nurse Angela. Their tired arms held out to him. "My faithful friends," he said, as if he were addressing a vast audience of well-wishers. "My fellow laborers," said Wilbur Larch, as if he were running for re-election, a little tiredly but no less earnestly, seeking the support of his companions who also honored the Lord's work. Olive Worthington sat in Wally's room with the lights off. That way, if Homer looked into the house from the outside, he wouldn't see her sitting there. He knew that Homer and Candy were at the cider house. She tried to tell herself that she did not resent the apparent comfort Homer could give to Candy. He was powerless to comfort Olive in the slightest. In truth, Homer's presence, given Wally's absence, irritated Olive. And it was testimony to her strength of character that she was able to criticize herself for this irritation. Only rarely did she allow her irritation to show. Never have considered Candy unfaithful, not even if Candy had announced to everyone that she was giving Wally up and marrying Homer Wells. It was only that Olive knew Candy. Olive realized that Candy could not give up Wally without giving him up for dead. Olive would have resented that. He doesn't feel dead, Olive thought. And it isn't Homer's fault that he's here and Wally's there, she reminded herself. I mean, sometimes life just has no rationale, no reason, no rhyme. It's just a chaotic, uncaring universe. You might curse it, you may say it's unfair that Wally's gone and Homer's here, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Sometimes it was just seriously screwed up. Again, with no explanation. Except that Wally enlisted, I guess. That's the explanation. A mosquito was in the room, and its needle-like whine so disturbed Olive that she forgot she was keeping Wally's room in darkness. She turned on the lights to hunt for the mosquito. Wouldn't there be terrible mosquitoes where Wally was? The Burmese mosquitoes were speckled, and much larger than the Maine variety. Ray Kendall was also alone, but he was only mildly bothered by the mosquitoes. It was a still night, and Ray watched the silent heat lightning violate the blackout conditions along the coast. He was worried about Candy. I believe that's her father, I believe. Raymond Kendall knew how someone else's death could arrest her own life. He regretted in advance how the forward motions of Candy's life might be halted by her losing Wally. If it was me, Ray said aloud, I'd take the other fella. The other fella Ray knew was more like Ray. It wasn't that Ray preferred Homer Wells to Wally. It was that Ray understood Homer better. Yet Ray did not disrupt a single snail while he sat on his dock. He knew that it took a snail too long to get where it was going. Every time you throw a snail off the dock, Ray teased Homer Wells, you're making someone start his whole life over. Maybe I'm doing him a favor, said Homer Wells, the orphan. Ray had to admit that he liked that boy. The lightning was less spectacular from the cider house roof. The sea was not visible even in the brightest flashes. Yet the lightning was more disquieting there. Both its distance and its silence reminded Candy and Homer Wells of a war they could not feel or hear. For them, it was a war of far-off flashes. I think he's alive, Candy said to Homer. When they sat together on the roof, they held hands. I think he's dead, said Homer Wells. That was when they both saw the lights go on in Wally's room. That night in August, the trees were full, the boughs bent heavy, and the apples, all but the bright waxy green Gravensteins, were a pale green going to pink. The grass in the rows between the trees was knee-high. There'd be one more mowing before the harvest. That night there was an owl hooting from the orchard called Cock Hill. Candy and Homer also heard a fox bark from the orchard called Frying Pan. Foxes can climb trees, said Homer Wells. No, they can't, Candy said. Apple trees, anyway, Homer said. Wally told me. He's alive, Candy whispered. A flash of heat lightning that illuminated her face. Homer saw her tears sparkle. Her face was wet and salty when he kissed her. It was a trembling, awkward proposition. Kissing on the cider house roof. I love you, said Homer Wells. I love you too, Candy said, but he's alive. He isn't, Homer said. I love him, Candy said. I mean, maybe he's alive in your mind, Candy. Maybe he's alive in your heart. But, in a practical sense, he's MIA. Could be alive, could be dead. We really don't know. I know you do, said Homer Wells. I love him too. Candy lowered her shoulder and put her head against Homer's chest so that he couldn't kiss her. He held her with one arm while his other hand strayed to her breast, where it stayed. This is so hard, she whispered, but she let his hand stay where it was. There were those distant flashes of light out to sea, and a warm breeze so faint it barely stirred the apple leaves or Candy's hair. Olive, in Wally's room, followed the mosquito from a lampshade, against which she was unable to strike it. It was a spot on the white wall above Homer's bed. As she mashed the mosquito with the heel of her hand, the dime-sized spot of blood left on the wall surprised her. The filthy little creature had been gorging itself. Olive wet her index finger and dabbed at the blood spot, which only made the mess worse. Angry at herself, she got up from Homer's bed, unnecessarily smoothing his untouched pillow. She smoothed Wally's untouched pillow, too, then she turned off the night table lamp. She paused in the doorway of the empty room to look things over. Turned off the overhead light. Homer Wells held Candy around her hips. Helped her off the roof. They must have known it was precarious to kiss on top of the cider house. It was more dangerous for them on the ground. They were standing together, arms loosely around each other's waists, his chin touching her forehead. Hold on, I lost my place. She was shaking her head no, but just a little. And they both became aware that the lights from Wally's room were out. They leaned against each other as they walked to the cider house, the tall grass clutching at their legs. They were careful not to let the screen door bang. Could have heard it. They preferred the darkness because they did not reach for the light switch in the kitchen. They never came in contact with the cider house rules that were tacked next to it. Only the palest flashes of the heat lightning showed them the way to the sleeping quarters, where the twin rows of iron beds stood with their harsh springs exposed. The old mattress rolled in army barracks fashion at the foot of each bed. They unrolled one. It was a bed that held many transients. History of the dreams encountered upon that bed was rich. The small moan they caught in the back of Candy's throat was soft and difficult to hear above the iron screeching of the bed's rusted springs. The moan was as delicate in that fermented air as the fluttery touch of Candy's hands, lighting like butterflies upon Homer's shoulders. Before he felt her hand grip him hard, her fingers sinking in as she held him tight. The moan that escaped her then was sharper than the grinding bed springs and nearly as loud as Homer's own sound. This boy whose crying had once been a legend upriver in 3 Mile Falls. Oh, how he could sound! Olive Worthington, rigid in her bed, listened to what she thought was an owl on Cock Hill. What is it hooting about? She thought. Thought of anything that would distract her from her vision of the mosquitoes in the jungles of Burma. Mrs. Grogan lay wide awake, momentarily frightened for her soul. The woman had absolutely nothing to fear. It was an owl she heard. It made such a mournful sound. Larch, who seemed always to be wide awake, passed his skillful, careful fingers across the keyboard of the typewriter in Nurse Angela's office. Oh, please, Mr. President, he wrote. Young Steerforth, who suffered allergies to dust and to mold, found the night oppressive. It seemed to him that he couldn't breathe. He was lazy about getting out of bed, therefore blew his nose on his pillowcase. Nurse Edna rushed to him at the sound of such thick and troubled trumpeting. Although Steerforth's allergies were not severe, the last orphan who was allergic to dust and mold was Fuzzy Stone. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. He was the one with the breathing problem. He was the one on the machine that died young. You've done so much good already, Wilbur Larch wrote to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Your voice on the radio gives me hope. As a member of the medical profession, I'm aware of the insidiousness of the disease you personally triumphed over. I believe he's referring to polio. After you, anyone who holds your office will be ashamed if he fails to serve the poor and the neglected, or should be ashamed. I think you should say it once more for the people in the rafters, Wilbur. Because it seems like, again, politicians of our day have completely forgotten. Ray Kendall stretched out upon his dock as if the sea had cast him up there, could not make himself get up, go inside, and go to bed. It was rare for the coastal air to be so torpid. The air was simply air as usual at St. Cloud's. I saw a picture of you and your wife. You were attending a church service. I think it was Episcopal, Wilbur Larch to the president. I don't know what they tell you in that church about abortion, but here's something you should know. 35 to 45% of our country's population. Growth can be attributed to unplanned, unwanted births. All right, hold on. I'm getting some kind of like Amber Alert. Hold on. I don't know why. think I'm still here on live on TikTok. Yeah, because I know where the Amber Alert is. Uh, Let's all hop in the van, y'all, and go hunting for some Scooby Doo mysteries. We'll track them down. We'll find them somewhere. Okay. All right. It's all right. Let's get back to the book. It seems like Larch's estimate is quite high, right? 35 to 45%. Half of all pregnancies unwanted. Do people not know about the consequences of their actions? Why does this keep happening? I don't know. Couples who are well-to-do usually want their babies. Only 17% of the babies born to well-to-do parents are unwanted. But what about the poor? 42% of the babies born to parents living in poverty are unwanted. Again, all these numbers might be made up. I mean, if they are, Mr. President, that's almost half. These are not the times of Ben Franklin, who, as you probably know, was so keen to increase the population. It's been the goal of your administration to find enough things for the present population to do and to better provide for the present population. Those who plead for the lives of the unborn should consider the lives of the living. Mr. Roosevelt, you of all people, you should know that the unborn are not as wretched or as in need of our assistance as the born. Please take pity on the born. I think that's it. Like in a nutshell, we just have to do a better job of taking care of the people who are already here, who are here. But anyway, Olive Worthington tossed and turned. Oh, take pity on my son, she prayed and prayed. People are egotistical too. They think of themselves, they think of their kids. Medium high in an apple tree in the orchard called Frying Pan, crouched warily in the crotch between the tree's largest branches, a red fox, its ears and nose alert, its tail poised as lightly as a feather, surveyed the orchard with a predatory eye. To the fox, the ground below twitched with rodents, but the fox had not climbed the tree for the view. It had run out the tree to eat a bird, the feather of which was thrust through the fox's whiskers, into the rust-colored goatee on the fierce little animal's pointed chin. Candy Candle clung to Homer Wells. Oh, how she clung! As the breath left both of them and stirred the otherwise unmoving air. The trembling mice beneath the floor of the cider house stopped in their tracks between the cider house walls to listen to the lovers. The mice knew there was the owl to worry about, and the fox. What animal was this whose sound was petrifying them? The owl does not hoot when it hunts. The fox does not bark when it pounces. What is this new animal? Wondered the cider house mice. What new beast has charged and disturbed the air? Is it safe? In Wilbur Larch's opinion, love was certainly not safe, not ever. For his own advancing frailty, since Homer Wells had departed St. Cloud's, he would have said love was to blame. How tentative he'd become concerning some things, and how suddenly irritable concerning others. Nurse Angela might have suggested to him that his more recent bouts of gloom and anger were as much the result of his 50-year-old addiction to ether and his advancing age as they were the result of his anxious love for Homer Wells. Mrs. Grogan had she been asked, would have told him that he suffered more from what she called St. Cloud syndrome than from love. Her said it would never have held love to blame for anything. Wilbur Larch viewed love as a disease even more insidious than the polio that President Roosevelt had stood up to so courageously. Sorry. If anyone blamed Larch, he occasionally referred to the so-called products of conception as the results of love. Although his dear nurses were upset with him when he spoke like this, did he not have a right to judge love harshly? After all, there was much evidence in both the products of conception and their attendant pain, and the injured lives of many of Dr. Larch's orphans, to justify his view that there was no more safety to be found in love than there was to be found in a virus. Yeah, poor Larch. He's really just seen like the after effects. Like he's the doctor who's like sorting through the battlefield, who laments the war, but he has to keep bandaging up dead and dying soldiers. Like that's basically Larch, but it's for people who don't want their kids. How love's just gone wrong, basically. Like how it just went wrong. Dr. Larch's opinion, even when he could prevail on his patients to practice some method of birth control, love was never safe. Consider the so-called rhythm method, wrote Wilbur Larch. Here in St. Cloud's, we see many results of the rhythm method. He had a pamphlet printed in the plainest block letters, common misuses of the prophylactic. wrote as if he were writing for children. In some cases, he was. Some men put the prophylactic on just the tip of the penis. This is a mistake, because the prophylactic will come off. It must be put over the whole penis. It must be put on when the penis is erect. Some men try to use the prophylactic a second time. This is also a mistake. Once you remove a prophylactic, throw it away. Wash your genital area thoroughly before allowing yourself to further contact with your partner. Sperm are living things, at least for a short time, and they can swim. Some men take the prophylactic out of its wrapper. They expose the rubber to light and air for too long, time before using it. Consequently, the rubber dries out and develops cracks and holes. This is a mistake. Sperm are very tiny, they can swim through cracks and holes. Some men stay inside their partners for a long time after they've ejaculated. What a mistake this is. The penis shrinks. When the penis is no longer erect, and when the man finally pulls his penis out of his partner, the prophylactic can slide completely off. Most men can't even feel this happening, but what a mess. Inside the woman, you have just deposited a whole prophylactic in all those sperm. All right. Yeah. We need PSAs from Wilbur Larch. Some men Homer Wells could have added, thinking of Herb Fowler, distribute prophylactics with holes in them to their fellow man. Is Herb Fowler to blame? Some might say yes, some might say no. Where did those holes come from? The Cider house at Ocean View, huddled with a huddle of mice, Homer Wells and Candy Candle could not move from their embrace. For one thing, the mattress was so narrow, it was only possible to share their mattress if they remained joined together. If for another, they'd waited so long, they'd anticipated so much, and both of them, so much was meant by having allowed themselves to come together. Yeah, as you might recall, uh, Candy's already been to St. Cloud's. She'd already been there for the purpose of getting an abortion. So she just keeps going. It just keeps on going. Well, I'm interested to see if she has another abortion. They've shared both a love and a grief, for neither of them would have permitted each other this moment if there were not at least parts of each of them that had accepted Wally's death. After lovemaking, those parts of them that felt Wally's loss were forced to acknowledge the moment with reverence and with solemnity. Therefore, their expressions were not full of rapture, not so void of worry as the expressions of most lovers after lovemaking. Does Homer Wells believe in birth control? I don't know. He doesn't believe in abortions. I know that much. Homer Wells, with his face pressed into Candy's hair, lay dreaming that he was only now arriving at White Cadillac's original destination. He felt as if Wally were still driving him and Candy away from St. Cloud's, as if Wally were still in charge. Surely Wally was a true benefactor to have driven him safely to this resting place. The pulse in Candy's temple, which lightly touched his own pulse, was as soothing to Homer as the tire hum when the great white Cadillac had rescued him from the prison into which he was born. There was a tear on Homer's face. He would have thanked Wally if he could. There is like a rescue dynamic. I don't know. I'm sure there's some psychology here. Like Homer is trying to repay Candy for taking him out of St. Cloud's. So it's kind of like a tit for tat, quid pro quo kind of deal. Maybe I'm just being cynical in saying that, but it seems like they're both kind of just uh, doing each other favors. Like Candy getting him out of St. Cloud's and then him sleeping with her. If in the darkness he could have seen Candy's face, he would have known that a part of her was still over Burma. They lay still for so long. The first man was bold enough to run across their bare legs, surprised them. Wells jerked up to a kneeling position. A moment passed before he realized that he left a whole prophylactic and all those sperm inside Candy. It was number 4 on Wilbur Larch's list of common misuses of the prophylactic. Uh-oh, said Homer Wells, whose fingers were quick and sensitive and trained. He needed only the index and middle fingers of his right hand to retrieve the lost rubber. Although he was very fast, he doubted he'd been fast enough. Despite the careful detail of Homer's instructions to Candy, she cut him off. I think I know how to douche myself, Homer, she said. So their first night of passion, which had only been slowly building between them, ended in haste, typical of the measure taken to avoid an unwanted pregnancy, the possible cause of which was fairly typical, too. I love you, Homer repeated, kissing her goodnight. There were both fervor and anger in Candy's goodnight kiss, both ferocity and resignation in the way she clutched his hands. Homer stood for a while in the parking lot behind the lobster pound. The only sound was the aeration device that circulated fresh oxygen through the water tank that kept the lobsters alive. The quality of the air in the parking lot was divided between brine and motor oil. The night's heat was gone. Cool, damp fog rolled in from the sea. There was no more heat, lightning to illuminate. However, slightly the view across from the Atlantic. It seemed to Homer Wells that there had been so much waiting and seeing to his life. Now there was something else to wait and see about. Wilbur Larch, who was 70-something, and the Grand Master of Maine in the field of waiting and seeing, gazed once again upon the starry ceiling of the dispensary. One of ether's pleasures was its occasional transportation of the inhaler to a position that afforded him a bird's-eye view of himself. Wilbur Larch was thus permitted to smile from afar upon a vision of himself. It was the night that he blessed the adoption of young Copperfield the Lisper. "Let us be happy for young Copperfield," Dr. Larch had said. "Young Copperfield has found a family. Good night, Copperfield." Only this time in Ether's memory it was a joyous occasion. There was even unison in the responses if Larch conducted a choir of angels, all singing Copperfield merrily on his way. It hadn't been like that. Copperfield had been especially popular with the littlest orphans. He was what Nurse Angela called a binder. In his good-natured, lisping presence, the spirits of other orphans rose and held together. That night, no one had joined Larch in wishing Copperfield good night and goodbye. Copperfield's departure had been especially hard for Dr. Larch, because with Copperfield's passing, there went from St. Cloud's not only the last orphan to be named by Homer Wells, but also the last orphan to have known Homer. Copperfield's leaving, a little more of Homer Wells left too. Holsteer, fourth, second born, and second named, had been adopted first. So we can also see like the influence, the legacy you might call it, that people leave behind. Candy over Burma, Homer at St. Cloud's. And technically there is still a remnant of Homer at St. Cloud's in the form of Larch, right? Good for Ether. I would allow Dr. Larch to revise his history. It should have been the Ether all along that had provided Dr. Larch with the impulse to be a revisionist with Fuzzy Stone. In Larch's Ether dreams, he had many times rescued Wally Worthington. The exploding plane had reassembled itself and returned to the sky. The parachute had opened. The gentle currents of the Burmese air had borne Wally all the way to China. Safely above the Japanese, above the tigers and snakes, above the dread diseases of Asia, how peacefully Wilbur Larch had seen Wally fly. While the Chinese had been impressed with Wally's noble good looks, with those patrician bones and that handsome face. In time, the Chinese would help Wally to find his base. He would come home to his girlfriend. This is what Wilbur Larch wanted most. He wanted Wally back with Candy, for only then would there be any hope of Homer Wells returning to St. Cloud's. I don't exactly think that's how it works. I don't think Homer's ever going to go back to St. Cloud's. Nearly 3 months after Wally's plane was shot down, the harvest at Ocean View began, and Candy Kendall knew she was pregnant. After all, she was familiar with the symptoms, so was Homer Wells. So, yes, we can see the past repeating itself over and over again. There's definitely something Freudian about Homer Wells, too, like how he's got a longing for his parents. His parents can't find him. It creates a void in Homer. He tries to fill it with like Candy and Wally. I wouldn't exactly say they're like father figures, but they did take him away from St. Cloud's the way adoptive parents would have, right? And then, of course, while he's missing, Candy's pregnant again. I'll challenge you all to form a prediction at this point. Do you think Candy's going to get a second abortion, or is she going to keep the baby of Homer? Yeah. Ragtag crew of pickers mauled the orchards that year. There were housewives and war brides falling out of trees, students dismissed from local schools so that they might contribute to the harvest. Even the apples harvest in 1940 was considered a part of the war effort. It made Homer a crew boss of the high school kids. whose methods of bruising the fruit was so various that Homer was kept very busy. Andy worked in the mart. She told Olive that her frequent bouts of nausea were probably caused by the smell of diesel fuel and exhaust that was constant around farm vehicles. Olive remarked that she thought the daughter of a mechanic and lobster man would be less sensitive to strong odors. When she suggested that Candy might be more comfortable working in the fields, Candy admitted that climbing trees also made her feel queasy. Never knew you were so delicate, Olive said. Olive had never been more active in a harvest or more grateful for there being one. The harvest that year reminded Homer Wells of learning to tread water. Both Candy and Olive had taught him how. Swimming in place, Olive called it. I'm just swimming in place, Homer told Candy. We can't leave Olive during the harvest. If I work as hard as I can, Candy told him, it's possible that I'll miscarry. It was not very possible, Homer Wells knew. Yeah, this was also a book that would benefit from a family tree. Um, so Olive is the mother of Wally. Senior is the father. I can't. Was that his official name? I can't really quite remember. And then Ray Kendall is the father of Candy. I can't remember who the mother is, though. Yeah, can't quite remember. I want to say she died young. I want to say. What if I don't want you to miscarry? Homer asked her. What if? Candy asked. What if I want you to marry me and to have the baby? Homer asked. They stood at one end of the conveyor belt in the packing house. Candy was at the head of the line of women who sized and sorted the apples, who either packaged them or banished them to Cider. Candy was retching, even though she had chosen the head of the line, because that put her nearest the open door. We have to wait and see, Candy said between retches. We don't have long to wait, said Homer Wells. We don't have long to see. I shouldn't marry you for a year or more, Candy said. I really want to marry you, but what about Olive? We have to wait. Well, and I mean, he didn't really wait, right? You're supposed to wait to conceive until after marriage, in my opinion. I mean, if you got a different experience, please drop it in the comments. But that, in my opinion, that's what works best in terms of family planning. I mean, you can certainly do it like wild and free, but that causes problems. Oh, willy nilly, like that's not really a good way to start a family, in my opinion. Okay, baby won't wait, Homer said. We both know where to go to not have the baby, Candy said. Or to have it, said Homer Wells. It's my baby too. How do I have a baby without anyone knowing I've had it? Candy asked. She retched again, and Big Dot Taft came up the packing line to see what was the matter. Homer, ain't you got no better manners than to watch a young lady puke? Big Dot asked him. She put her huge arm around Candy's shoulder. You get away from the door, darling, Big Dot Taft said to Candy. You come on and work down on the line. There's only apples to smell down there. The tractor exhaust comes in the door. I'll see you soon, Homer mumbled to both Candy and Big Dot. One likes to be sick around the opposite sex, Homer, Big Dot informed him. Right, said Homer Wells, orphan and would-be father. The man had considered wiser just to know something than to talk about it. That no one said Candy Kendall was pregnant didn't necessarily mean that they didn't know she was. It meant it was a given that any boy can get any girl in trouble. What they do about it is their business. They want advice, they should ask. If you were an orphan, what would you have? Large Lunch wrote in A Brief History of St. Cloud's. An orphan or an abortion? I think Homer should maybe just take things slow because he was himself an orphan, so. And not only that, he was also witness to Candy's abortion, right? I'm pretty sure he was. So, I mean, this whole thing, kind of from a certain angle, just looks kind of strange. Really, like just kind of really strange. Like an abortion, definitely. Melanie said once when Homer Wells had asked her, "How about you?" "I'd have an orphan," Homer said. "You're just a dreamer, Sunshine," Melanie told him. Now he supposed it was true. He was just a dreamer. Well, really, orphans and abortions are kind of similar, right? They're both unwanted. It's just one makes it and one doesn't. That's the main difference. Oh, no. He would just focus on the negative outcomes, but okay. He supposed it was true. He was just a dreamer. He confused the high school kids with each other and gave some of them credit for picking bushels that other kids had picked. He stopped two of the boys from throwing apples at each other and felt that he had to make an example of them in order to protect the fruit and establish his authority. While he was driving the boys back to the apple mart, where he forced them to wait without getting in trouble, to miss some morning's pickings, a full-scale apple fight broke out among the other high school kids, and when Homer returned to the field, he interrupted a war. The crates that were already loaded on the flatbed were splattered with apple seeds. The hot parts of the tractor gave off a burned apple stench. Some must have tried to use the tractor for cover. Perhaps Vernon Lynch would have made a better foreman for the high school kids, Homer thought. All Homer wanted to do was make things right with Candy. They sat on Ray Kendall's dock now. They sat close together. They didn't sit for long. It was getting cold. They sat huddled against one of the posts at the dock's end, where Ray had seen Candy sit with Wally so many times and in somewhat the same position. Ray noted Wally had always sat up straighter, as if he were already fastened to the pilot's seat. Ray Kendall understood why it was necessary for them to brood about the process of falling in love, but he felt sorry for them. He knew that falling in love was never meant to be such a morose moment. Well, and it's kind of unfortunate. Let's see. I think there's like 5 pages left. Wally is kind of the backdrop of their relationship, for better and for worse. Ray had every respect for Olive. It was for Olive. He knew that Homer and Candy were forced to be mourners at their own love story. You should just go away, Ray said out the window to Homer and Candy. He spoke very softly, and the window was closed. Ray is her father, I believe. Yeah. Homer was afraid that if he insisted to Candy that she marry him, insisted that she have their baby, that he would force her to reject him completely. He also knew that Candy was afraid of Olive. It was not that Candy was so eager to have a second abortion. Homer knew that Candy would marry him and have their baby on the same day if she thought she could avoid telling Olive the truth. Candy was not ashamed of Homer. She was not ashamed of being pregnant either. Candy was ashamed that Olive would judge her harshly for her insufficient feelings for Wally. Candy's faith in Wally being alive had not been as strong as Olive's. It was not unusual for the mother of an only son and the young woman who is the son's lover to envision themselves as competitors. I mean, it is still possible that Wally's alive, but as more time progresses, it's less and less likely. And I mean, I don't see why. I mean, I don't know. You all discuss in the comments, like, should people stay widowers or widows? Do you think that people should seek love again, like Lenny Kravitz in his song, I Believe in Love Again? Like, I personally think people should be allowed to move on. I don't see why you have to like just like stay with one till the end. Because yeah, life happens, and life happens in unforeseen ways sometimes. People enter and leave our lives sometimes unexpectedly. So I think it's kind of unfair to just expect people to just stay. But, it depends too. I personally don't know any widows or widowers, but I would think I would encourage them to do what makes them happy, basically. Like don't think you have to stay alone unless you really want to. In the case of Candy, I would say she's doing okay. She's not doing great because she didn't get married before having another baby, but I mean she's doing all right. More shocking to Homer's mind was that he could gather his own feelings. He already knew that he loved Candy and wanted her. Now he discovered that more than wanting her, he wanted her child. And you have to think about it like some of this is probably just pure ego from Homer's perspective. Just all about him. They're just another trapped couple, more comfortable with their illusions than they were with the reality of their situation. After the harvest, Homer said to Candy, we'll go to St. Cloud's. I'll say that they need me there. It's probably true anyway. Because of the war, no one else is paying attention to them. Tell your dad it's just another kind of war effort. We can both tell Olive that we feel an obligation to be where we're really needed, to be of more use. You want me to have the baby? Candy asked him. I want you to have our baby, said Homer Wells, and after the baby's born, you're both recovered, we'll come back here. We'll tell your dad and Olive, or we'll write them, that we've fallen in love and that we've gotten married. And we conceived a child before we did any of that? I guessed. I mean, I think they're just rushing in. Like, you gotta kind of think about things a little bit more before you commit, in my opinion. Homer Wells, who saw the real stars above the blackened coast of Maine, bright and cold, and envisioned the whole story very clearly. We'll say the baby's adopted, he said. We'll say we felt a further obligation to the orphanage. I do feel that in a way, anyway, he added. Our baby's adopted? Kenny asked. So we have a baby who thinks it's an orphan. What? No, Homer said. We have our own baby and it knows it's all ours. We just say it's adopted, just for Olive's sake, and just for a while. That's lying, Candy said. Right, said Homer Wells. That's lying for a while. Maybe when we came back with the baby, maybe we wouldn't have to say it was adopted. Maybe we could tell the truth then, Candy said. Maybe they're just afraid of hurting all his feelings. Because again, it's all just one big ego game, right? Olive, her ego in the form of Wally, Homer's ego in the form of his still unborn child, Candy being basically a what do you want to call it, conduit? I guess it's kind of a cynical way of saying it, but she's basically a conduit. Maybe Homer said, maybe everything is waiting and seeing, he thought. He put his mouth on the back of her neck. He nuzzled into her hair. He thought that Olive could accept it. We thought that we could accept about Wally, and he added. Then we wouldn't have to lie about the baby being adopted, would we? I say just tell her the truth. I mean, right, said Elmer Wells. What's all this worrying about lying? He wondered, holding Candy tightly. She softly cried. Was it true that Wilbur Larch had no memory of Homer's mother? Was it true that Nurse Angela and Nurse Edna had no memory of his mother either? Maybe it was true, but Homer Wells would never have blamed them if they had lied. They would have lied only to protect him. If they remembered his mother and his mother was a monster, wasn't it better that they lied? To orphans, not every truth is wanted. If Homer discovered that Wally had died in terrible pain or with prolonged suffering, if Wally had been tortured or burned to death or had been eaten by an animal, Homer certainly would have lied about that. Homer Wells had been an amateur historian. He would have been as much a revisionist as Wilbur Larch. He would have tried to make everything come out all right in the end. Homer Wells, who always said to Wilbur Larch that he, Larch, was the doctor, was more of a doctor than he knew. First night of cider making, he shared the work of the press and grinder with Meanie Hyde and Everett Taft. Big Dotner's kid sister Deborah Pettigrew were the bottlers. Deborah was sullen at the prospect of messy work. She complained about the slopping and the spilling, and her irritation was further enhanced by the presence of Homer Wells, to whom she had not been speaking. Deborah's understanding that Candy and Homer had become partners in a certain grief was markedly colored by her suspicion that Candy and Homer had become partners in a certain pleasure, too. At least Deborah had not reacted generously to Homer's suggestion that they just be friends. Homer was puzzled by Deborah's hostility and assumed that his years in the orphanage had deprived him of some perfectly sensible explanation for her behavior. It seemed to Homer that Deborah had always denied him access to anything more than her friendship. Why was she now incensed that he asked no more of her than that? Meanie Hyde announced to Homer and Everett Taft this would be his first and last night of the harvest because he wanted to stay home with Florence. Now that her time was approaching, Meanie said. When Mr. Rose pressed cider, there was a very different feeling in the fermented air. For one thing, everything went more quickly. The pressing was a kind of contest. For another, there was a tension that Mr. Rose's authority created. The knowledge of those tired men asleep, or trying to sleep, in the next room lent to the working of the grinder and the press a sense of hurry and of perfection that one feels only on the edge of exhaustion. Deborah Pettigrew's future heaviness grew more and more apparent the wetter she got. She was a matching slope in the sisters' shoulders, even a slackness in the backs of Deborah's arms that would one day yield the massive jiggles that shivered through Big Dot. In sisterly imitation, they wiped the sweat from their eyes with their biceps, not wanting to touch their faces with their cider-sweet, sticky hands. After midnight, Olive brought them cold beer and hot coffee. When she had gone, Meanie Hyde said, that Mrs. Worthington's a thoughtful woman. Here she is not only bringing us something, but giving us a choice. And her with Wally gone, said Everett Taft, it's a wonder she even thought of us. Whatever's brought to me, whatever's coming, Homer thought, I will not move out of its way. Life was finally about to happen to him. The journey he proposed making back to St. Cloud's was actually going to give him his freedom from St. Cloud's. He would have a baby, if not a wife, too. He would need a job. First, I'll take the baby trees and plant them, he was thinking, as if apple trees would satisfy St. Cloud's. As if his planting them would satisfy what Wilbur Larch wanted from him. By the end of the harvest, the light grew grayer, and the orchards were darker in the daytime. Although more light passed through the empty trees, the picking, cruising experience was visible in the shriveled apples still clinging to the hard-to-reach limbs. The ground was already frozen in St. Cloud's. Homer would have to make a special trip for the baby trees. He would plant them in the spring. It would be a spring baby. Homer and Candy worked only the night shifts at Cape Kenneth Hospital now. The days when Ray was building the torpedoes were the days Homer could spend with Candy, in her room above the lobster pound. There was a freedom about their lovemaking, now that Candy was already pregnant. Although she could not tell him, not yet, Candy loved Homer well. She enjoyed herself much more than she had been able to with Wally. She could not bring herself to say aloud that anything was better than with Wally. Making love was better with Homer. She doubted that this was Wally's fault. She and Wally had never had the time to feel so free. The girl and I are coming, Homer wrote to Dr. Larch. She's going to have a baby, neither an abortion nor an orphan. I want a wanted baby, Nurse Angela said. We're going to have a wanted baby. Not a planned one, said Wilbur Larch, who started out the window of Nurse Angela's office as if the hill that rose outside the window had personally risen against him. I suppose he's going to plant the damn tree, said Dr. Larch. What does he want a baby for? How can he have a baby and go to college or to medical school? You might be surprised, Wilbur. You might be surprised. He's probably not going to do the latter, right? Seems like he's already made his choice. When was he ever going to go to medical school, Wilbur? Nurse Edna asked. I knew he'd be back, Nurse Angela shouted. He belongs with us. Yes, he does, said Wilbur Larch. Involuntarily and somewhat stiffly, his back straightened, his knees braced. His arms reached out, and the fingers of his hands partially opened as if he were preparing to receive a heavy package. Nurse Edna shuddered to see him in such a pose, which reminded her of the fetus from the 3 Mile Falls, the dead baby, whose posture of such extreme supplication had been arranged by Homer Wells. Homer said to Olive Worthington, I hate to leave, especially with Christmas coming. All those memories. There is something and someone I've been neglecting. Really all of them at St. Cloud's. Nothing changes there. They always need the same things, and now that there's a war, everyone is making an effort for the war. I think St. Cloud's is more forgotten than ever. Dr. Larch isn't getting any younger. I should be of more use than I am here. With the harvest over, I don't feel like I have enough to do. At St. Cloud's, there's always too much to do. You're a fine young man, said Olive Worthington, but Homer hung his head. Do you remember what Mr. Rochester said to Jane Eyre? Dread remorse when you are tempted to err, Miss Eyre. Remorse is the poison of life. It was an early November morning in the kitchen at Ocean View. Olive had not done her hair or put her makeup on. The gray in the light and her face and in her hair made Mrs. Worthington look older to Homer. She was using the string of her tea bag to wring the last of the tea from the bag. Homer could not raise his eyes from the ropey, knotted veins in the back of her hands. She always smoked too much, and in the morning she always coughed. Candy is coming with me, said Homer Wells. Candy's a fine young woman, Olive said. It's most unselfish of you both. When you could be enjoying yourselves to give comfort and companionship to unwanted children. Stringing across the belly of the tea bag was so taut that Homer thought it would slice through the tea bag. Olive's voice was so formal that she might have been speaking at an award ceremony, describing the heroism that was worthy of prizes. She was trying her hardest not to cough. When the string toward the tea bag, some of the wet leaves stuck to the yolk of her uneaten soft-boiled egg, which was perched in a china egg cup that Homer Wells had once mistaken for a candlestick holder. I can never thank you enough for everything you've done for me, Homer said. Olive Worthington just shook her head. Her shoulders were squared. Her chin was up. The straightness of her back was formidable. I'm so sorry about Wally, said Homer Wells. There was the slightest movement in Olive's throat, but the muscles of her neck were rigid. He's just missing, Olive said. Right, said Homer Wells. He put his hand on Olive's shoulder. She gave no indication that the presence of his hand was either a burden or a comfort. After they remained like that for a while, she turned her face for her cheek on his hand. Where they remained for a while longer, as if posing for a painter of the old school, or for a photographer who was waiting for the unlikely, for the November sun to come out. Olive insisted that he take the white Cadillac. Well, Ray said he candied to Homer, I think it's good for you both that you stick together. Ray was disappointed that neither Homer nor Candy acknowledged his observation with any enthusiasm. As the Cadillac was leaving the Lobster Pound parking lot, Ray called out to them, "Try having some fun together." Little does he know. They already have. Somehow he doubted that they had heard him. Who goes to St. Cloud's to have fun? I've not really been adopted, thought Homer Wells. I'm not really betraying Mrs. Worthington. She never said she was my mother. Even so, Homer and Candy did not talk a lot on the drive. Their journey inland, the farther north they drove, the more the leaves had abandoned the trees. There was a little snow in Skowhegan, where the ground resembled an old man's face in need of a shave. There was more snow in Blanchard and in East Moxie and in Moxie Gore. They had to wait an hour and 10,000-acre tract where a tree was down across the road. The snow had drifted over the tree, the smashed shape of which resembled a toppled dinosaur. Moose River and Misery Gore and Tomhegan, too. Snow had come to stay. The drifts along the roadside were shorn so sharply by the plow. They stood so high that Candy and Homer could detect the presence of a house only by chimney smoke, or by the narrow paths chopped through the drifts that were here and there stained by the territorial pissing of dogs. So long, dude. So long. We're almost done here. We got about 5 pages left. Olive and Ray and Meanie Hyde had given them extra gas coupons. They decided to take the car because they thought that it would be nice to have a means to get away from St. Cloud's, if only for short drives. By the time they reached Black Rapids, Homer had put the chains on the rear tires. They realized that the winter roads, this was only the beginning of winter, would make driving impossible. If they had asked him, Dr. Larch would have saved them the trouble of bringing the car. He would have said that no one comes to St. Cloud's for the purpose of taking little trips away from it. He would have suggested, for fun, they could always take the train to 3 Mile Falls. With the bad roads and the failing lights and the snow that began to fall out after Ellenville. It was already dark when they reached St. Cloud's. Headlights of the white Cadillac climbing the hill past the girls' division illuminated 2 women walking down the hill toward the railroad station, their faces turning away from the light. Their footing looked unsure. One of them didn't have a scarf, the other didn't have a hat. The snow winked in headlights as if the women were throwing diamonds in the air. Homer Wells stopped the car and rolled down the window. "May I give you a ride?" asked one woman. "You're going the wrong way," one of them said. "I could turn around," he called to them. When they walked on without answering him, he drove ahead of the hospital entrance of the boys' division and turned out the headlights. The snow falling in front of the light at the dispensary was the same kind of snow that had been falling the night that he arrived in St. Cloud's after his escape from the Drapers in Waterville. There had been something of a brouhaha between Larch and his nurses about whether Homer and Candy would sleep. Larch assumed that Candy would sleep in the girls' division and that Homer would sleep where he used to sleep, with the other boys, but the women reacted strongly to his suggestion. "They're lovers," Nurse Edna pointed out. "Surely they sleep together." "Well, surely they have," Larch said. "That doesn't mean that they have to sleep together here." "Homer said he was going to marry her," Nurse Edna pointed out. "Going to," grumbled Wilbur Larch. "It would be nice to have someone sleeping with someone else here," Nurse Angela said. "Seems to me," said Wilbur Larch, "that we're in business because there's entirely too much sleeping together. Ding, 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 winner, winner, chicken dinner, Dr. Larch. He gets it." "They're lovers," Nurse Edna repeated indignantly. So the women decided it. Candy and Homer would share a room with 2 beds on the ground floor of the girls' division. How they arranged the beds was their own business. Mrs. Grogan said that she liked the idea of having a man in the girls' division. Occasionally the girls complained of a prowler or a peeping Tom. Having a man around at night was a good idea. "Besides," Mrs. Grogan said, "I'm all alone over there. You 3 have each other. We'll all sleep alone over here," Dr. Larch said. "Well, Wilbur Nurse said, don't be so proud of it." Olive Worthington, alone in Wally's room, regarded the 2 beds, Homer's and Wally's. Both beds were freshly made up. Both pillows were without a crease. On the night table between their beds was a photograph of Candy teaching Homer how to swim. Because there was no ashtray in the boys' room, Olive held her free hand in a cup position under the long, dangling ash of her cigarette. Raymond Kendall, alone above the lobster pound, viewed the tri-pitch photographs that stood like an altarpiece over his night table, on his night table. Next to his socket wrench set, the middle photograph was of himself as a young man. The middle photo was of himself as a young man. He was seated in an uncomfortable-looking chair. His wife was in his lap. She was pregnant with Candy. Cher is in apparent danger. Left-hand photograph was Candy's graduation picture. The right-hand photograph was of Candy with Wally. Their tennis rackets pointed at each other like guns. Ray had no picture of Homer Wells. He needed only to look out the window at his dock in order to imagine Homer clearly. Ray could not look at his dock and think of Homer Wells without hearing the snails rain upon the water. Ursina had tried to keep a little supper warm for Homer and Candy. She put the disappointing pot roast in the instrument sterilizer, which she checked from time to time. Mrs. Grogan, who was praying in the girls' division, did not see the Cadillac come up the hill. Nurse Angela was in the delivery room, shaving a woman who had already been broken her bag of waters. Homer and Candy passed by the empty and brightly lit dispensary. They peeked into Nurse Angela's empty office. Homer knew better than to peek into the delivery room when the light was on. In the dormitory, they could hear Dr. Larch's reading voice. Although Candy held tightly to his hand, Homer Wells was inclined to hurry in order to not miss the bedtime story. All right, I think I'll go ahead and end here for today on page 416, and then I will resume in tomorrow's episode. Got about that many pages in tomorrow's episode, so I hope you're all ready. 447, so a bunch of reading. Okay, all right. I mean, it's definitely not a short book. Okay, yeah, Candy. I mean, this is the chapter where Wally's presence is really felt, right? He gets shot down. Olive is trying to stay hopeful, trying to remain optimistic. I think he's still there. I think he's still alive, like a lot of moms in wartime. She wants to keep believing their son's alive. Candy moving on. Even though it says her heart is over Burma, it's more or less with Homer now. She may remember Wally, but I mean, it says that even Irving is saying she prefers loving Homer. So yeah, a lot of interesting relationship dynamics. I think that's probably the best thing about this book is it really focuses on the interactions between characters and relationships of the characters, and the significance of places too. I'm trying to search like St. Cloud's. St. Cloud's represented Homer's longing for a parent, and then to him it became more about a purpose, him being useful, him continuing to be useful. So, in a way, St. Cloud's kind of grew in significance for Homer, even though he was useful earlier on in the book, too. So, maybe Homer hasn't really experienced that much of an arc in terms of his overall character. But yeah. So, it's interesting to see how he's recognized as he returns to St. Cloud's. Okay, I was gonna say, guys, too. Uh, I know I have 0 viewers on TikTok. I see all kinds of people joining. I mean, the numbers never really made much sense to me on TikTok. Like, it just looks like a bunch of hoo ha shenanigans. Like, how's it the case that people are joining, but I have 0 viewers? That doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, you're joining, but you're not. Anyway, what I was gonna say is you can drop in the comments recommendations for books to read me, and I'll see if I can find the ebook to then read to you all. I know this is basically a series I'm piloting here on the show, Cider House Rules. It was meant as a an alternative series, an alternate series to 100 Years of Solitude. The reading I had a couple years back. And so this is basically just a book I found in the local library. Like, I had never seen or heard of it before, and I was like, why not try it for the show? But yeah, if you're digging this series, like, please feel free to drop me a recommendation. Hey Stormer, I would like to know if you can read like The Great Gatsby, which I've already read, or maybe something I haven't read, like Great Expectations. Um, Hmm. Yeah, something that's hopefully shorter and less verbose. This book was kind of a brutal read. Like, I had to start cutting the chapters into two parts because of how long the chapters were. And I don't know, like, I'm not really crazy about this book. I'm glad I'm in the final stretch. Like, I'm gonna have the episode tomorrow, and then I will have 4 more episodes next week. Fix that. 4 more episodes next week, and that should be it for Cider House Rules. And what I'm planning is at the end of the episode, I'll have like a Q&A, a recap, a discussion of the book, and then I'll close out the series. All right. And then yeah, I'm open to recommendations or suggestions, or I will probably just take a break from streaming, from going live. It doesn't seem like I'm wildly popular anyway. It is what it is, right? I'm not a beautiful woman, so that doesn't help me. But, I mean, that's life. Sometimes it sucks and then you die. So, what can you do? If you're following me, big thank you on TikTok. Please remember to like, follow, share, donate Bama Storm Show. Thanks to those that do. If you're on YouTube, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, donate Bama Storm Show. Thank you for any and all support that the show should receive. It's because of viewers like you, supporters like you, that this show is successful. So thank you. Big thank you. Sleep tight, have a good night, and as always, thanks for watching.